Hello to some and welcome back to others to the Supply Chain Automation Workforce webinar series. We are in the final two throes, or the final phases, I should say, of this webinar. We thank you for all of those who have joined us throughout the webinar series. This series is entitled, once again, Collecting and Using Accurate Demographic Data. I am Kimberly Harris, subject matter expert in diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Mr. Cori Biase, subject matter expert of Veterans Affairs. So we're just excited to continue the conversation, as I said before, that we've been having now for about four webinars in. And this particular webinar, we're going to focus on the objectives of this particular webinar are basically looking at some of these aspects of what is it to leverage data in an effective communication strategy. The title of this particular session is Using Data in Planning, Strategic Affirmative Action and Outreach, and we're centering in that an effective communication strategy. So just to kind of give you an overview of what the objectives are for this particular webinar, they are, we plan and we intend to look at ways and talk about ways and explore ways of leveraging data to develop a communication strategy, using data to measure success in affirmative action planning, specifically looking at data as a tool to understand context and what we can do with that. And then we'll also wrap things up as we do in every webinar, giving you a little bit of a peep into what you can expect in what will be the final webinar session, which will be session 6. So we hope you will join us for that as well. So as we think about leveraging this data, an effective communication strategy, we've talked about all of the ways in which data can be not only collected, but utilized, operationalized to help not only meet the baseline requirements to be compliant, but to take us to that next step and also make sure that we are really engaging a responsive outreach and recruitment plan, that we are also being very strategic about how a diversified, more diversified workforce, a workforce reflective of, and basically that is reflected in the data collection that we do, can help to drive our organizations and make them more competitive overall. And we left off in the previous webinars with this whole notion of intent plus strategy equaling effectiveness, right? So what is it to really think about from the onset and not be and not be reactionary, I should say, not be reactionary, but really be responsive and intentional in thinking about what is it? How are we looking to collect the data? And that does take an awareness of the landscape of place and space. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll revisit some of that. And then crafting a strategy in response to that. And then the end result being an effective recruitment and outreach plan. And core to that, right, is that communication strategy. How do we communicate? To whom do we communicate? And the different ways and places and spaces and platforms that we communicate. So when we talk about this the fundamental elements of a communication strategy, we have these three kind of nuggets that we want you to think about. It should be informed, it should be relevant, and it should be honest. I'm going to spend some time talking about that first component, that informed component. And as I said before, my esteemed colleague, Mr. DiBiase, will step in to talk about the relevancy and the honesty component. But let's mine down into the informed component. And what do we mean when we say incorporate what you know into what you say? And that may sound like a flip statement, right? Like what, obviously, right, we're going to do that. But what we're thinking about is, as you have sat with, as you have thought about, this process, and you have basically done this utilization analysis, right? And you have these metrics of, the demographic configuration within your given organization, and how that is in alignment with or how disparate it might be from the demographics in the places and spaces in which you conduct and operate your business. That was that first step of, that awareness. And then we talked about in the previous webinars, this whole process of what does it mean to really collect actionable, relevant, meaningful data? Our awareness of place and space, who are the potential partners in our respective service areas, who could basically help to shore up our recruitment strategy by helping us and maybe shepherding us to key priority populations and community groups that are underrepresented in our particular or in our respective organizations. So being thoughtful of that. So when we talk about incorporating what you know into what you say, taking not only what we know about the apprenticeship opportunity itself, the particular job description, but also too, what do we know about the landscape? Who are the underrepresented community groups within our particular organization? And what are the things that matter to them? What are the things that they value? And that doesn't have to be something far out. It could just be as simple as knowing that, we may be in a place and space geographically that may have a large population of individuals under the age of, let's say, 40 or 30. Or 20, or some other generational strata. And we may know other things about them from the research that we've done, the interrogation and inquiry that we've engaged in, the partners and the individuals that we have discovered and are cultivating these relationships around the things that matter to them. It may be a work-life balance preference that they really prioritize, and we've come to learn that we have to be mindful of those particular things as we are, messaging and basically sharing and engaging in outreach and talking about these particular opportunities. Is there flexibility in work schedule? Can some of these particular tasks be ultimately conducted from home? What are the things that are true about the opportunity that are valued by the priority groups that we are messaging to, that we can lift up and incorporate that into our messaging of those particular groups? So with that in mind, those are some of the things that we need to really be thinking about. And once again, it goes back to that equation, right? And that key component of that equation, which is that intentionality. So kind of delving down deeper into that and informed, wanting to just kind of hover a minute on this particular slide that you have probably seen now if you have joined us a time or two, right? This is a slide that basically when we first began the webinar, we talked a lot about, how do we take the good and make it better, right? And how do we take the better and really make that actionable? When we think about what is it to have compliant data and those components of compliant data, and then, what are the components of really, building on that foundation to have good data. And we have some examples that are provided. Now, how do we take that really rich and good data, as we just talked about a few moments ago, and really leverage that into a communication strategy that will end up enabling us to have effective, not only outreach, but also effective communication, effective recruitment, and ultimately effective retention. And what do I mean by effective retention? We know, and we that the cost of training and recruitment and outreach can be really, really expensive, not only from the standpoint of fiscal, resources, but also from the standpoint of human resources. So as we are being mindful about how do we go about crafting a communication strategy that messages and signals to community that not only are all welcome, but we seek to and we endeavor to learn and understand more. We also understand some things, and we want to know that we recognize, see, and hear the things that you value. And to the degree possible, you will be entering into a place and space where those things will be recognized and respected. So those are the things that can turn the tables from just a high volume hand touches, right, as you're doing outreach and trying to actually, do recruitment. And then, from those high volume hand touches to actually identifying, onboarding, and growing individuals within the organization that are not only diverse in composition, but really feel that they recognize and they are connected to, and they're engaged and valued by the organization itself. So what are the tools that we use to harness that, to harvest that valuable data that we then leverage and help us to fortify and craft an effective communication strategy? We talked about those methodologies in previous webinars. The overarching umbrella term that we call them are these landscape scans, right? And there are different ways that we can begin to find out and go deeper and broader about who are the people in our neighborhood? Who are the people in the places and spaces that we are operating in that we need to be aware of? And even the discoveries that we make along the way of entities and organizations similarly missioned, complementary services to our own, all the things that once we become aware of them, or more aware of them and what they offer and can offer, it helps us to craft a strategy that we can then say, you know what, we have an ally with, let's say, some professional organization or some community grassroots group that can help us basically to message and signal and convene, individuals within community and community itself, so that we don't have to, number one, do all the heavy lifting of trying to identify and go with and find the people, but we can begin to engage in authentic partnership with the entities in community and ultimately with community themselves, so that our recruitment process seems a little bit more authentic, right? And not something that's awkward and just for this one and done instance. So these methodologies that we talked about, such as data scrapes and asset mapping and snowballing, are all processes and approaches that help us to uncover and discover all of the different entities and actors and services, TA, special interests, all the things that are out there operating within community that are operating parallel alongside of us, that could help us in our outreach and recruitment, and specifically as it pertains to communication. There may be standard language that they have. There may be different platforms that we may not be aware of that they utilize, that we could basically make that ask, make that petition of asking for some partnership in those particular steps or tasks, whether it be crafting an effective, opening kind of a solicitation, or whether it be how to, convene really effective, really engaging and interactive information fairs or career fairs or something of that nature. The communication strategy, if we're really thinking about it from that standpoint of connecting all of that valuable information that we harvested in that landscape scan and in that data collection, and utilizing that to really drive and inform the way that we communicate, how we communicate, what platforms, how frequently, and all of those things that are super important to be aware of, that can make all of the difference for us. So, as we think about, and I want to make sure I haven't skipped a step here, as we think about that messaging, it's important once again thinking about the platform. What generations are, on what types of platforms. There aren't as many Gen Zers on Facebook probably now as there are Gen Xers. We know this from the research. It tells us this. So where are we messaging? To whom are we messaging? How are we messaging? What should that message delivery look like, in terms of language, in terms of tone? Do we need a cultural guide as opposed to being the person to deliver or to kind of evangelize ourselves? Sometimes it might make more sense to partner with someone from community to message in a way that feels authentic and feels safe and feels as if it's something that is really that will really resonate with our community groups. And then just the actual way that the communication is delivered. Text heavy versus heavily graphic and visual. These are all things for us to be thinking about. And with that, I will stop there and hand it over to my colleague, Mr. Cori DiBiase.
Thank you so much for that, Kim, and fantastic foundation for us to work from here. And just continuing this same message as we think about the messaging that we're putting together, as we're thinking about the folks that ideally we want to see using our services more, engaging in our registered apprenticeship opportunities more than they are now. Of course, the next thing we want to think about is the relevance of our message, the relevance of what it is we have to say about our services, what it is we have to say about our registered apprenticeship program, and how we craft that message to really fit with the needs, the questions, and the expectations of all the different possible groups that we might want to be outreaching to. So what particular aspects here are we going to emphasize, and for what audience? Now, this is more like a series of questions that we would ask, or a series of ideas to consider. Of course, when we talk about customizing a message, that means there's no one right answer. Certainly one of the very first things we're going to talk about for anyone would be rate of pay, right? That is at least one reason why all of us work. However, for example, if my career goal were to work in registered apprenticeships so that I could support folks who currently don't have access to all the ranges of economic opportunities they should or that they want to, so that I can support folks to gain that access to those economic opportunities, well, probably if that's what I'm telling you my career goals are, probably, as all of you on the line know right now, pay is not going to be the absolute number one selling point in all of this, right? We look at other things beyond pay to justify and to inspire us in the work that we do, and so do many, many other folks as well. So we would also want to think about something like career outlook. I both in terms of like, where would I go next if I engage in this apprenticeship opportunity? Where would I go next within this industry, within this sector, within this particular organization? What is there? Is there a sort of management chain that I'm going to be working up? Are there additional skills that I can add to potentially start accessing different types of tasks and start taking on different responsibilities, even if my job title, quote unquote, doesn't change. This is kind of like, we're telling folks to get on a highway, right? When we're inviting them into a registered apprenticeship program, we're saying, hey, just go right down there. You're going to see the signs for Interstate 15. Get on there and go from there. The sky's the limit. You're going to love it. Well, if I tell you that, if that's my advice to you, your natural next question is going to be, okay, well, where does that go? Well, if I follow your advice, where do I go next? Where do I go in 5 miles? Where do I go in 50, in 500 miles? Where is this road going to lead me? Well, that's the same thing we want to be able to tell someone. What are the different options? What will unfold for someone most likely as they kind of look at the career outlook within this industry? Of course, one of the aspects of registered apprenticeships that we all love so much is the on-the-job training aspect. This is just a great way. So if we think, and I often default to thinking about veterans and the experience that they have in their transition out of military service and potentially into a registered apprenticeship program. Well, one of the things we all talk about again and again and again is we're talking about supporting veterans in accessing civilian careers is the culture shift that's going to come with that. A civilian job is it's just not like working in the military. They're two very different things. And there's no way that I can kind of explain all the possible differences. There's no way that I can just give you all the information in the abstract so that you can make a decision. Part of the experience here is that, okay, I'm going to get into that environment and I'm going to see what it's like. I'm going to see what I like about it, what I don't like about it, how I can potentially make some adjustments with it. It's like learning a language through immersion, right? There's no way we can learn this in the abstract. We have to go in and just see what it's really like on the ground. Well, that's the opportunity here. And of course, the same principle applies if I am going through a process of reentry after having been involved in the justice system or having been incarcerated. This is true if I've been out of work for an extended period of time for whatever reason. This is true if I'm just switching from one industry to another. Maybe I've always worked in manufacturing and I'm looking to go over into healthcare. Very different worlds, of course, right? So this is just our way of exposing folks to that and giving them that information in a way that we can't possibly explain in the abstract. And as we all know, whenever we're making major choices in our lives, information is power. Informed choice is necessary for real access in any of these instances. So, of course, that's one of the things that registered apprenticeship has, an advantage it has that we can tell everyone about, that, hey, you're going to just get to see what the realities of this job are. And by the way, the employer is going to get to see the realities of you. If, again, I'm a veteran, and I personally am not a veteran, but if I were a veteran and I had my resume and it had a lot of references to very specific military skills and very specific military pay grades and skill grades and trainings and all those pieces, and I've done my best to translate it into more civilian friendly terminology, but maybe the best thing to do for me, for my own career outlook, is to get in there and say, hey, listen, I'll show you my resume, but let me really show you what I can do by getting on the job doing this work. So the sheer potential of the on-the-job training aspect of registered apprenticeships, as we all know, of course, is one of the great it's one of the great values of registered apprenticeship, and it is so applicable when we're talking about again the relevance of these messages and expanding our message out there so that we are truly engaging as much of the community as possible. But continuing this relevance of message idea, a couple more questions to ask ourselves, and that are going to affect how the things we say, what we emphasize in our messaging. Are we providing assistance for folks who need childcare, whether it's single parents or, hey, maybe it's two parents but they're both working and still will need childcare, or maybe there'll be some additional demands where that will be really helpful. Are we prioritizing outreach to any group? Are we prioritizing outreach to veterans, to returning formerly incarcerated citizens, to citizens with disabilities, to folks who use English as a second language? It almost doesn't matter. But if we are prioritizing a group, then of course we're going to make that clear. We're going to say, hey, we are really interested in doing more work in this area, serving more folks who are veterans or who identify in whatever other way, and we're going to be very upfront about that, because that's part of welcomeness that we'll be talking about in our next sessions. And finally, and I think in many cases, most importantly, do we have relationships? When we look at our partnerships in the community, do we partner with organizations who serve individuals with mobility issues or other disabilities, individuals who've experienced trauma, folks who are using English as a second language, other members of the community? Are we partnering with organizations who represent those folks more or less broadly? And of course, another thing to consider here, a question you may have been asking as I've been talking about all this, as Kim has been talking about what she's been talking about, is, well, okay, yeah, I want to craft a message that's relevant to, again, we'll use, for example, veterans, to the veterans in my community, but I'm not a veteran. So How am I supposed to know how to craft my message? How am I supposed to know what to emphasize? Should I just make a lot of assumptions? That doesn't sound like a great idea, right? Well, the great thing about this is here, when we have these partnerships in the community, that gives us a chance to simply ask these kinds of questions. If I'm working with an organization that serves a lot of veterans in my community, I can talk to staff there and say, hey, what's going to really resonate with folks, particularly if those staff are themselves veterans. Certainly, as folks begin to come through the registered apprenticeship program, I can take the time to ask them, what was your experience like? What could have been better? What could have been more relevant to you? All those things. So when in doubt, when we lack information, the simple solution is always to find a way to ask the folks who are most impacted by the question, by the subject area that we're curious about. So, and that, of course, is where those community partnerships come in so handy, because that way, when we turn back to those community partners and say, hey, we'd love to be serving the folks that you're serving, we'd love to open up this opportunity to the folks that you serve in your organization, well, we know then that we have a message that is going to resonate with the folks in that group. But continuing with this conversation, we also, of course, we want to be honest, right, in our messaging. And being honest means sometimes, of course, avoiding the temptation to just accentuate the positive while completely eliminating the negative. There are going to be challenges. There are going to be potential negatives, and we don't want to linger on those. We don't want to present those first and say, hey, well, here are the problems you might have, and then I'll tell you about the good stuff. Obviously, we want to emphasize what's positive in all this, but we can't completely hide or certainly attempt to change a message so that it's no longer accurate by completely eliminating possible negative aspects of this. So we want to be really upfront. As we're talking about all the good things, we also want to emphasize what might be perceived as minuses, whether it's the time commitment, the number of hours we're asking of folks, both when they're eventually fully working in the job, or even when they're going through the training aspect and saying, yeah, there might, early on, this might take a lot more time than you're accustomed to, but here's what's going to go from there. Are we talking about a physical work environment? Obviously, we want to be very clear about that, because in most cases, I should say, folks who hear, if they know exactly what is required of a job and they see, well, okay, that's not something I'm comfortable doing, well, then they're going to choose for themselves naturally to move in a different direction. So we're not trying to be negative. We're not trying to push people away, but we are just, sharing that reality. Is there travel involved? Do folks think that's really great? Because, hey, why not? I'd love to be able to check out a new town while I go and conduct a sales meeting in Wichita. Or do I think, geez, actually, my daughter's 3 months old, not a great time for me to be traveling, so not a great thing. So again, there's no necessary positive or negative here. It's just presenting all of the information as realistically as possible and giving folks the chance to make their own choices. Finally, a little side note, just to give you folks a sense of, the real life of Cori and Kim behind the scenes here. We did have a number of conversations about if one of us should sing the line, accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative. Should we do that? Which one of us should do that? I thought Kim should do it. Kim thought I should do it. We had some differences of opinion there. Finally, we realized, if we really want to model accentuating the positive, probably neither one of us should sing, and we should spare you all that experience. So this is us modeling that notion of accentuating the positive by not singing to you. So little aside there, a little behind the scenes, and let's continue with our presentation right now. So we also, of course, as we've talked about again and again, we keep coming back to, we're going to continue to use data as we're going through this process of crafting our message, continuing this, to open up new recruitment channels, continuing to engage new groups in our community. We're going to continue to use data to measure success and affirmative action. Now, one of the forms that most often takes is what we call an audit. Now, audit is not a word that most of us are really anxious and happy to hear, right? We don't think of this as a positive experience. Well, first of all, okay, so we can think of this from the perspective of whether it's a DOL or a state entity or some other entity within the various groups that we're working with. Maybe they need to come in and do an audit, and we're not necessarily going to be looking forward to that. But of course, we also recognize that this is a great opportunity to learn. We also recognize that folks conducting audits are not doing it with the hope of, oh, we got you, we found a problem. They're doing it with the hope of giving us yet another set of eyes, looking at this scenario and giving us some insight as to how we can continue to improve. So as we think about this audit, whether it's coming from an external source or whether it's something we do on our own internally, maybe it's once a year, once every 6 months, to just say, okay, if we did get audited, what would it look like? What would our strengths be? What would our weaknesses be? Let's look inward for a minute and decide what we can start doing better based on the data that we see. Of course, the data that we're going to be looking at in this case will include data on race and ethnicity, on gender, on disability, on job title and how it correlates to other information, on the department that folks are going into, the kind of tasks that they're going into, the location in which they're doing their work, their preferences for that, and where that's going to proceed. It'll also include looking at employment tenure for folks. Do we see resignations at different points in time, either during the apprenticeship or afterward? Are there certain pressure points where we see a lot of folks saying, you know what, actually I decided this was not for me? And then sort of asking ourselves the next question, well, okay, what caused that? Why is that? Why is it this point that folks just don't seem to be progressing past? And that might mean that we are doing something wrong at that stage that we can improve. It might also mean that we haven't prepared folks with the right information leading up to that point, and they're kind of thinking like, oh wow, now that I've had this experience, now that I see where things are, now with this new information, I'm not as interested in engaging here. So it's going to tell us something, certainly, about what we've been doing and how we've been working with folks. Of course, we're also looking at terminations. We're looking at retirement. We're looking at exit interview data. We're also looking at some positive stuff, right? We're looking at retention and longer term tenure. We're looking at advancement. How did certain kinds of apprenticeship programs lead to certain tracks of advancement, to certain kinds of career pathways within the field? Because that helps us know how we can build on our strengths, right? That's entirely the point of that. So lots of great information to have. And of course, that exit interview data, when we're in a situation where we're parting ways with someone, knowing the why, having as much of a conversation as we can to understand what is motivating someone in that instance to step away from either our registered apprenticeship program or from the career that results from it. And of course, as with everything else, by the time we're at that exit interview stage, all the work that we've done to establish a relationship with someone, that's either now going to, we're now going to be able to take full advantage of that relationship by expecting a really open and honest conversation that, okay, maybe we're going to hear some things we don't want to hear. Maybe we don't want these things to be true, but we're going to hear someone's perspective about how we can improve, particularly, again, if we have laid a foundation of trust, engagement, and connection through all the other things that we've been talking about how we foster this engagement, and all the things, by the way, that we are going to continue to talk about next time as we talk more about welcomeness and engagement and really connecting with folks in this process. So all good stuff that we want to be thinking about here, either, like I say, as we're preparing for an audit that someone is going to impose on us, or quite possibly as we're thinking about how we can kind of conduct our own internal self-check, whether it's through a formal audit or just kind of sitting down, combing through the numbers and talking through some of the information that we gather from them. So that brings us to the close for today, leaving us with one final session, session 6, in our series. Really, this, of course, is the final session is our capstone event. We're going to try and weave together everything we've talked about, all the themes that we've been teasing out. And of course, you've seen, as Kim said, if you have been attending these webinars throughout, you've seen some of the themes. You've seen us come back to some common ideas again and again and again. Well, we're going to try and use all those strands. We're going to try and tie them together, weave them together in the right way to really think like, okay, how do we tie all these things together to make ourselves the most engaging, welcoming, and diverse kind of organization, kind of employer that we can possibly be. So that's what we've got coming up next time. Very excited to continue the conversation then. In the meantime, of course, don't forget, you've got a lot of great resources that you can check out from the Supply Chain Automation Workforce Hub. You've got our very substantial email address here, SCA Workforce Hub at manhattanstrategy.com. You've also got our website, scworkforcehub.com. You can sign up for our newsletter at the website. You can check us out on social media, our LinkedIn, our Facebook, our Twitter, also known as X, all that kind of good stuff. And you see over here on the right-hand side is just an example of the newsletter that we send out, which has some great resources, great information. So without further ado, on the behalf of Dr. Harris and the entire team here at the Supply Chain Automation Workforce Hub, thank you so much again for taking the time to talk with us today, and we look forward to speaking with you next time. Thanks very much.